The Grand Lake St. Mary stretched serenely under the soft morning sun of April. Its calm waters mirrored the golden hues of early light. The scene was peaceful, almost picturesque. But the stillness was soon interrupted by an unexpected discovery. It was a hotel waitress who first noticed that something was wrong. A room long overdue for checkout was still vacant. The occupant hadn't left and the bills were racking up by the hour. At first she thought it might be a simple misunderstanding. Maybe the guest had wandered off into town, or perhaps they were enjoying the day a little longer than expected. But as she stepped closer, her unease began to mount. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that would haunt her for years. Inside, the clothes were disheveled, belongings scattered, but something felt off, compelling her to call for help despite the gnawing feeling in her gut. Soon, police were alerted to the situation. Officers arrived, searching the premises, and it didn't take long before they stumbled upon the chilling truth. The missing guest was nowhere to be found. But his car was still parked outside, and his last known location was now their first lead. As they traced his steps, they found a disturbing clue, a shallow grave hidden just outside of town. What they uncovered there would change everything. The body, lying contorted and covered in mud, emanated a foul stench that was impossible to ignore. The smell of decay mixed with the environment, sending a shiver through the detectives as they processed the scene. The body was carefully removed from the grave, wrapped in a plastic sheet, as forensic experts began their meticulous work. Upon closer inspection, the signs of trauma were immediately apparent. The victim's body was bloated, but the pattern of bruising around his neck was unmistakable. Ropes wrapped tightly around his limbs indicated deliberate restraint. The shallow grave and the way his body had been disposed of made it clear this wasn't a spontaneous act. This was something planned, a murder designed to disappear without a trace. Detective Marissa Davis, known for her sharp instincts and calm demeanor, took charge of the investigation. The hotel offered little in terms of immediate clues, and there were no signs of a struggle. No footprints leading to the water, suggesting that the crime scene wasn't directly near the lake. The location of the grave, hidden away along a road, was far from the nearest residential area, complicating the search even further. As the investigation unfolded, the community began to feel the weight of the crime. News spread quickly, and the peaceful life that many had taken for granted now felt fragile. A sense of dread washed over Wapakoneta as people began to question what had happened, and why the victim's identity remained unknown. With no identification on the body, the investigation hit a roadblock. The victim had no name, no background to go on. But then a breakthrough came. Police reviewed the hotel's dashcam footage. There, in the grainy video, was the guest car parked late at night outside the hotel. The camera footage revealed little about the vehicle beyond its dark color and the timing, but the investigation was now moving forward. The police logged the statement and continued with their investigation. But as they gathered forensic evidence, they started noticing more peculiar details. There was a floral perfume on the body, an odd clue in the middle of a brutal crime. And then the most telling sign of all, the neck. The victim's neck was ruptured, bruised in a way consistent with strangulation. This detail, though seemingly minor, immediately raised alarms with the lead investigator. Detective Davis had learned over the years that even the smallest pieces of evidence could completely change the course of a case. She knew that the body's state of decomposition, the bruising on his neck, and the method of disposal were all linked. But to what? The coroner's report came in that afternoon. Timothy was likely in his late 40s or early 50s. He had been dead for several days, buried in that shallow grave long before the authorities found him. But there was still no clear cause of death. The autopsy confirmed trauma to the neck, but the exact circumstances of his death were still unclear. Without an identification, the investigation seemed to hit another dead end. But Detective Davis and her team weren't ready to give up. They scrutinized every detail, every fiber, every mark. There were too many signs that pointed to something deliberate. This wasn't just a random killing. This was someone who had taken great care to ensure that the crime was concealed, that the evidence would be erased. Yet even in the cold earth of the shallow grave, the circumstances felt oddly personal, as though the killer had tried to hide a part of their own story. The team knew that the grave had to hold more meaning. Who would go through the trouble of carefully hiding a body, ensuring it was never found, unless the person they murdered had a significant connection to them? Detective Davis's mind raced through the possibilities. And then, as the investigation continued, a chilling realization crept in. This was no random act of violence. This was a personal vendetta. The more the team pieced together the puzzle, the clearer it became. the guest's murder had been meticulously planned. Each detail, from the rope to the perfume, from the injuries to the burial, suggested someone who had taken great care in executing this crime. It wasn't about getting away with it. It was about making sure the guest was erased from existence entirely. The discovery of Timothy Hovanec's body rocked the small town of Wapakoneta, Ohio, leaving a lingering sense of fear and uncertainty. In a community once defined by its peaceful streets, friendly neighbors, and idyllic surroundings, the murder marked the beginning of a profound shift in the fabric of everyday life. Families, once accustomed to leaving their doors unlocked and their children playing freely outside, began locking up early at night, retreating inside with a palpable sense of unease. As the sun set each evening, the town that had once been a haven for tranquility now held a dark undercurrent. Neighbors exchanged wary glances, each wondering if someone they'd known for years had a darker side. The woods near the lake, once a place of serenity and natural beauty, transformed in the minds of the townspeople. What had once been an escape into nature now felt like a place that held secrets too terrible to uncover. Local diners, the usual spots for friendly chatter, became places of whispered conversations. Residents gathered, not to discuss the weather or the latest town gossip, but to speculate on the horrific crime that had unfolded in their midst. Some felt the crime was the work of an outsider, a stranger who had come into their tight-knit community to sow chaos and destruction. They believed that someone, an unknown killer from beyond their borders, had left a trail of terror behind them. But for others, the unsettling possibility lingered that the truth was much closer to home. Could the killer be someone among them? Someone they had trusted? Someone who had lived in their midst all along? As the investigation progressed, the mystery surrounding the man in the shallow grave only deepened. His identity remained unknown, and for days the people of Wapakoneta could only speculate about the man's past and the events that had led to his tragic end. Rumors began to circulate. Was he a local, a transient, or someone with a troubled history? But the police had their own task, uncovering the truth. Detective Miranda Baker, known for her sharp intuition and steady demeanor, took the reins of the investigation. She was well aware of the weight the case had on the town's psyche. The police force worked tirelessly, poring over every shred of evidence, cross-referencing witness statements, and following every lead. They knew that the key to unlocking this mystery lay not just in the victim's identity, but in the motivations behind such a violent act. Was it a random act of violence, or was there a deeper, more personal connection? The investigation into the death of the guest was launched with the primary objective of identifying the victim and understanding the circumstances surrounding his tragic end. Detective Jennifer Davis, an experienced investigator from the Auglaize County Sheriff's Office, knew from the beginning that solving the mystery of Timothy's death would require understanding who he truly was. His personal life, his relationships, and any potential threats he faced in his final days. The coroner's office worked diligently to reconstruct the image of the man, and while the victim's identity was important, it was the breakthrough in forensic evidence that provided the first major lead. A dashcam memory from his vehicle was retrieved, and when it was played back on the computer screen, a haunting sequence of events unfolded in the day leading up to the tragedy. The footage was a chilling insight into the final moments of his life. It was clear now that this was no random act. This was the calculated work of someone Timothy knew well. Timothy Hovanec, 36 years old, was a man who led a quiet but impactful life. At the time of his death, he worked for the U.S. Department of State, specializing in aquatic biology and water quality. A respected professional in his field, Timothy had obtained a PhD in ecology, evolution, and marine biology from the University of California, Santa Barbara. His expertise in microbiology, filtration systems, and water quality made him an important asset in the field, particularly to researchers involved in aquatic studies. Before working for the State Department, Timothy had held the position of Chief Science Officer at Marineland Aquarium Products and had experience managing intensive aquaculture facilities. He had also volunteered with the U.S. Peace Corps in the Philippines, further highlighting his commitment to improving the environment and working for the greater good. To his colleagues, Timothy was a kind, patient, and dedicated professional. His contributions were well known in the aquatics industry, and he was widely regarded as an expert in his field. However, as the investigation continued, it became apparent that Timothy's outward appearance of stability masked a more complicated and troubling reality. His personal life, particularly his marriage to Amanda Hovanec, was a source of growing tension in his life. As detectives sifted through the details of Timothy's life, they found that the man who had once seemed confident and reliable was now struggling with a series of personal battles, particularly in his marriage. The couple's home, a modest two-story house on the outskirts of Wapakoneta, Ohio, seemed ordinary at first glance. It was well kept, with a freshly mowed lawn and curtains drawn tightly shut. Yet inside something was off. When investigators visited Amanda Hovanec, she explained that Timothy had been missing for several days. However, she had not reported his disappearance to authorities. This was not out of neglect, she claimed, but because they were in the midst of a tumultuous divorce, and it was not unusual for Timothy to take some time for himself during heated arguments. Amanda's demeanor during the interview struck Detective Davis as strange. She was calm and collected, her responses to questions precise and measured, almost as though she had rehearsed them. When asked about the recent events leading up to Timothy's disappearance, Amanda deflected, offering vague statements about work stress and family issues. Her avoidance of direct answers and her failure to make eye contact raised immediate red flags for the investigator. Detective Davis made a mental note of these inconsistencies, suspecting that there was more to Amanda's story than she was letting on. Timothy's friends and colleagues painted a contrasting picture of his personal life. Those closest to him described him as a man who had been increasingly withdrawn in the months leading up to his death. His friends noted that he had been talking about his frustrations with his marriage, particularly Amanda's controlling behavior and frequent mood swings. He confided in them that he was considering leaving her but was reluctant to do so because of the financial dependency she had on him and how she might react. At the State Department, colleagues recalled Timothy as a dedicated and professional worker. They also noted that in recent months he had seemed distracted and on edge. One colleague even remembered an instance when Timothy had received a phone call that visibly upset him, although he never shared the details of the conversation. It was clear that something was weighing heavily on his mind. As investigators combed through Timothy's personal and financial records, they discovered more disturbing details. His salary, though modest for his position, had been suddenly cleared from his bank accounts in the weeks prior to his death. Friends and colleagues described him as someone who was always friendly and generous, but they noticed a change in his behavior. He seemed more distant, more preoccupied, and less likely to engage in the lighthearted conversations he was once known for. Detective Davis and her team found a number of draft messages on Timothy's phone. It was clear that he had been contemplating his future and perhaps even considering leaving Amanda for some time. However, no one could have predicted the deadly turn their relationship would take. The investigation into the death of Timothy Hovanec was launched with the primary objective of identifying the victim and understanding the circumstances surrounding his tragic end. Detective Jennifer Davis, an experienced investigator from the Auglaize County Sheriff's Office, knew from the beginning that solving the mystery of Timothy's death would require understanding who he truly was. His personal life, his relationships, and any potential threats he faced in his final days. The coroner's office worked diligently to reconstruct the image of the man, and while the victim's identity was important, it was the breakthrough in forensic evidence that provided the first major lead. A dashcam memory from Timothy's vehicle was retrieved, and when it was played back on the computer screen, a haunting sequence of events unfolded in the day leading up to the tragedy. The footage was a chilling insight into the final moments of Timothy's life. It was clear now that this was no random act. This was the calculated work of someone Timothy knew well. As investigators combed through Timothy's personal and financial records, they discovered more disturbing details. His salary, though modest for his position, had been suddenly cleared from his bank accounts in the weeks prior to his death. Friends and colleagues described him as someone who was always friendly and generous, but they noticed a change in his behavior. He seemed more distant, more preoccupied, and less likely to engage in the lighthearted conversations he was once known for. Detective Davis and her team found a number of draft messages on Timothy's phone. It was clear that he had been contemplating his future and perhaps even considering leaving Amanda for some time. However, no one could have predicted the deadly turn their relationship would take. As the investigation pressed on, the more Detective Davis and her team looked into Amanda Hovanec's background, the more unsettling details began to emerge. On the surface, Amanda appeared to be just another grieving spouse, maintaining a calm composure in the face of her husband's disappearance. But the deeper they dug, the more suspicious her behavior seemed. Amanda, who had initially seemed cooperative, soon became the primary focus of the investigation. Her calm demeanor in interviews, though seemingly composed, was beginning to feel cold. She spoke about Timothy as though he were just another person in her life, a person who had simply disappeared, no mention of panic or concern. It was as if she had already written him off, treating his absence like an inconvenience rather than the loss it was. Her responses were often vague and distant. When asked about their relationship, she said they had been arguing but about mundane things, nothing specific. No mention of deep emotional struggles, no reflection on the years they had spent together. As she spoke, it became apparent that Amanda had no interest in discussing the emotional depth of the situation. The lack of emotion in her words stood in stark contrast to the grief that one would expect from a wife whose husband had suddenly gone missing. It was this emotional detachment that raised alarm bells. Detective Davis had seen this before. When the person closest to the victim, often a spouse or family member, fails to show the expected signs of grief, it raises suspicion. Was Amanda truly distraught, or was she simply going through the motions, carefully crafting a narrative that she knew would make her appear innocent? There was an eerie calmness to her that made Detective Davis feel uneasy, as if Amanda had rehearsed every word, every movement, every glance, so that she could present herself in the best possible light. As the investigation continued, the team expanded their interviews to neighbors and anyone who had known Timothy in the days leading up to his disappearance. The results were chilling. Neighbors reported that Timothy had seemed different, more withdrawn and distracted than usual. One neighbor even recalled hearing heated arguments between him and Amanda just before he vanished. These revelations painted a picture of a man who had been deeply troubled, possibly by something or someone close to him. Timothy's emotional state seemed to have deteriorated in the days leading up to his disappearance, a fact that was corroborated by the people around him. Even more disturbing were the inconsistencies in Amanda's account. She claimed that Timothy had been frustrated with their marital issues, yet those closest to him said he had never expressed such things to them. Was Amanda hiding something? Had her actions in the days leading up to Timothy's disappearance been more sinister than she let on? The detectives began to consider the possibility that their marital issues went deeper than Amanda was willing to admit. The investigation also uncovered details about Amanda's past, adding another layer to the mystery. What had once appeared to be a simple case of marital discord now seemed to be spiraling into something darker. Amanda's background revealed a history of controlling behavior, and her financial dependence on Timothy was no secret. Could this financial strain have pushed her to desperate measures? Was her desire for control and her need to maintain financial stability behind Timothy's disappearance, or worse, his death? As Detective Davis and her team pieced together Amanda's past, the true nature of her relationship with Timothy became clearer. While some had seen her as a devoted wife, others began to question the dynamics at play in their marriage. Was Amanda truly the loving spouse she portrayed herself to be, or was there a darker side to her, one capable of pushing her husband to the brink? The few days leading up to the horrific crime were marked by strange and unsettling behavior from Amanda Hovanec. Neighbors had observed her pacing back and forth, speaking urgently to someone, though they couldn't make out the details. What caught their attention more than anything was the sight of Amanda and an accomplice unloading equipment from her car, an unusual sight that sparked suspicion. It wasn't something she typically did, and the timing itself raised red flags. A faint scent of bleach lingered in the garage, unnoticed at first, but it was enough to cause concern. On the shelves, a pair of soiled work boots were tucked away, oddly placed with no obvious explanation. This small detail was puzzling, especially given that Amanda rarely spent time in the garage. Could this be a sign that something darker was at play? And if so, what had transpired in the days leading up to Timothy's tragic death? Neighbors also noticed something else that seemed out of place. A shovel, recently returned to its spot, as though it had been used for something other than ordinary yard work. The timing of these actions seemed too coincidental to be ignored. Amanda, who had always been known for her calm and routine demeanor, was now acting in ways that were entirely inconsistent with her usual self. Even more troubling were the financial transactions. Large amounts of money had been withdrawn with no clear justification, heightening suspicions. As detectives pieced together these small, subtle clues, they began to question Amanda's every move. Was she preparing for something? Or had she already been planning her husband's murder for weeks? The investigation took another critical turn when officers arrived at the scene of the crime, examining the crime scene for physical evidence of a struggle. A small but significant detail stood out, a scratch mark on the hardwood floor. It appeared as though something heavy had been dragged across it. The question now was what had been moved and why. With these growing suspicions, the detectives reviewed the dashcam footage from Timothy's vehicle. The video was chilling, his final moments captured in excruciating detail. He was seen interacting with Amanda, trying to make sense of the situation. "What the heck are you doing?" he asked, clearly confused and startled. "Did you just assault me?" His words echoed in the recording, a desperate plea for clarity, for answers. But before he could say more, his voice trailed off, the poison coursing through his body, silencing him. Before April 24, 2022, had not been easy for Amanda and Timothy. The couple had been locked in a bitter divorce battle for months, with Timothy fighting for full custody of their children. Tension had been building between them for some time, a fact that was documented in the court records. Just months before the murder, Amanda's affair with another man had come to light, further destabilizing the already fraught relationship. Despite the emotional turmoil Amanda was experiencing, her overwhelming need to control every aspect of her life, especially her relationship with the children, drove her down a dangerous path. Her marriage, once filled with love, had deteriorated, but she wasn't willing to relinquish control, especially not over her children. Even as her life seemed to be unraveling, Amanda clung to the belief that she could keep everything in her grasp. This desperation, the fear of losing her grip on her children, pushed her to make an unimaginable decision. Her choice to murder Timothy was not a rash, impulsive act born out of a moment of anger. This was a calculated and cold decision, one she had been carefully planning for months. Amanda's method was chillingly precise. She used M99, a poison typically used in veterinary medicine. This substance was incredibly potent, around 1,000 times stronger than morphine, meaning a mere drop could kill a person in minutes. For Amanda, this was no random choice. It was the result of her careful deliberation. Acquiring M99 wasn't easy. It involved a network of contacts and a level of premeditation that painted a picture of a woman who had thought this through far beyond what anyone might have expected. By the time April 24, 2022 arrived, Amanda had already put her plan into motion. The morning seemed ordinary enough, with no sign of the tragedy that was about to unfold. She met Timothy at their Wapakoneta, Ohio home for what was supposed to be a routine child custody exchange. What was meant to be a civil handoff, a regular arrangement dictated by the court, quickly turned into something far darker. As Timothy arrived, probably unaware of what was about to happen, he became the victim of a meticulously planned murder. Amanda injected him with a lethal dose of M99 right there in the parking lot. The effects were almost instantaneous. Timothy, confused and in fear, tried to make sense of what was happening to him. "What the heck are you doing?" he shouted, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and growing panic. But before he could fully comprehend his peril, his body started to betray him. "Get off of me," he pleaded, but the poison had already taken its toll. His cries for help became weaker as his body quickly succumbed to the poison's effects. In just minutes, Timothy Hovanec, a devoted father and professional, was dead. The dashcam footage from Timothy's car was later retrieved, revealing the chilling final moments of his life. As Timothy's voice grew fainter, so did his attempts to resist. Amanda didn't rush to his aid, showing no signs of remorse or panic. Instead, she methodically collected his belongings, his phone, his smartwatch, and she even turned off the engine of his vehicle. This wasn't a woman in shock. This was a woman who knew exactly what she had done. She wasn't trying to save her husband, nor was she distraught. She was covering her tracks, erasing every possible trace of her involvement. This wasn't the impulsive action of someone who had snapped in a moment of fury. This was a deliberate, cold-blooded murder. Amanda had set the stage, and in the final moments as Timothy's life slipped away, she took full control of the situation. The lack of panic in her actions, the careful retrieval of his belongings, all pointed to one undeniable truth. Amanda had planned this. This was not an accident or an emotional outburst. This was a calculated execution, and she had no intention of letting the truth surface easily. But the investigation into Timothy's death would reveal more. It would be up to the detectives to peel back the layers of deception, uncover the hidden motives, and expose the chilling reality of Amanda's actions. Would the pieces fall into place? Would justice be served? As more evidence came to light, it would soon become clear that this wasn't a case of one mistake. It was a chain of calculated decisions, each one more damning than the last. And Amanda's coldness was just the beginning of the nightmare that was yet to unfold. Amanda Hovanec's arrest sent shockwaves through the community, quickly making headlines across the nation. The details surrounding her husband's death, coupled with her actions leading up to the crime, sparked an outpouring of public outrage. It was difficult to understand how a mother could do such a thing to her own husband, especially in front of their children. The authorities acted quickly, arresting Amanda for the murder of her husband Timothy. The evidence against her was mounting, but the emotional weight of her actions hung over the case, adding layers of disbelief and horror. Her arrest symbolized the culmination of months of tension, as the public began to piece together the details of the crime, wondering what would drive someone to poison their own spouse. Friends, family, and even her co-workers were shocked and in disbelief, grappling with the idea that someone they knew could be capable of such an act. As Amanda was booked and taken into custody, her cold and detached demeanor in the face of such a horrific crime left the public with a lingering sense of dread. The arrest was just the beginning of a legal battle that would expose even more chilling details about the true extent of her premeditation. The trial began, and what followed was an emotional and intense series of courtroom proceedings. Timothy's family, who had been devastated by his untimely death, were forced to relive the harrowing events of April 24, 2022. The prosecution presented a case that was both heartbreaking and airtight, laying out every detail of the crime, from the moment Amanda injected Timothy with the lethal dose of M99 to the chilling dashcam footage that recorded his final moments. The prosecution outlined the clear premeditation involved in the crime, showing how Amanda had meticulously planned Timothy's murder, even choosing a poison that was incredibly difficult to acquire. They presented evidence of her attempts to cover up the crime, including how she had carefully removed his personal belongings after he died and disposed of his body. The toxicology report confirmed the presence of the poison in Timothy's system, and the dashcam footage captured his terror and confusion as he realized what was happening. The timeline of events was set, and there was no question that Amanda had intentionally killed her husband. Amanda's defense, however, argued that she had acted in self-defense. They claimed that Timothy had been abusive and that she was trying to protect herself from him. But this argument fell apart as the prosecution presented evidence that painted a completely different picture, one of cold, calculated murder. The jury listened as the emotional testimonies of Timothy's family members painted a portrait of a man who was loving, dedicated, and kind, everything that Amanda's actions had betrayed. Throughout the trial, Amanda's demeanor seemed eerily detached. She showed little to no emotion as the graphic details of her actions were revealed. As the prosecution presented evidence, including the footage of her coldly injecting her husband and the toxicology reports, Amanda appeared disengaged, almost as though she were unaffected by the gravity of the situation. This lack of empathy made it difficult for the jury to feel sympathy for her, and the more they heard, the more her demeanor seemed to cement her guilt. Her lack of emotional response during the trial was one of the key factors that led the jury to doubt her claims of self-defense. It was as if she was indifferent to the pain and suffering she had caused, not just to her husband but to their children and families as well. The prosecution's case was clear and thorough, and they systematically dismantled the defense's arguments. They showed how Amanda's actions weren't the result of a single moment of passion or self-defense but were part of a premeditated plan to end Timothy's life for reasons that were more about control and resentment than any form of self-preservation. The defense attempted to argue that Amanda had been under extreme emotional stress due to the custody battle and her strained relationship with Timothy. They suggested that she had lost control in the heat of the moment. But the evidence told a different story. Every action Amanda took, down to the meticulous method she used to procure the poison and the way she disposed of Timothy's body, suggested cold calculation, not a momentary lapse in judgment. The dashcam footage in particular painted a chilling picture of her resolve. As Timothy pleaded for his life, Amanda showed no signs of remorse. The defense's case struggled to make any significant headway, and with each passing day of the trial, it became more and more apparent that Amanda's fate was sealed. The jury had heard everything they needed to hear, and the emotional weight of Timothy's family's testimony, combined with the hard evidence, left little room for doubt. The trial was a harrowing experience for everyone involved, but it was the testimony of Timothy's family that seemed to resonate most with the jury. They spoke of a man who had loved his children, a man who had been an upstanding citizen, and someone who had never once threatened his wife. As they recounted their memories of him, the courtroom was filled with emotion. Amanda's lack of remorse and her failure to take responsibility for her actions stood in stark contrast to the grief of Timothy's family, who had lost not just a father but a friend and confidant. As the trial drew to a close, the evidence against Amanda was overwhelming. There was no escaping the fact that she had deliberately chosen to end Timothy's life. The chilling footage of his last moments, his voice filled with fear and confusion, would haunt everyone who had seen it. And yet, throughout the trial, Amanda's cold indifference remained. It was a stark reminder of the depths of her calculated actions. As the jury deliberated and the final verdict loomed, there was a collective sense of anticipation. Would the jury find her guilty of murder, or would they be swayed by the defense's claims of emotional distress? The fate of Amanda Hovanec hung in the balance, but the evidence had spoken, and it was clear what the outcome should be. Amanda was led away from the courtroom. The judge pronounced her sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was quiet, the weight of the decision settling in on everyone present. Amanda's fate was sealed, but the true magnitude of her crime seemed to linger in the air. Timothy's family, though grateful for the conviction, knew that nothing could fill the void left by his untimely death. The judge's words resonated throughout the room. Amanda Hovanec, your actions were cold, deliberate, and cruel. You took the life of a man who had done nothing but try to protect his family. You have caused irreparable harm to your children, to your family, and to the community. There is no excuse for what you did, and your punishment will reflect the gravity of your crime.